Oh, fascinating stuff indeed. Thanks, guys. Now, let me paint a picture for you. It's a Friday morning, about 10:30 in the morning. Firstly, you're late for work and you're at home affairs, standing in a queue that's wrapping around the corner of the street, right? And then somebody just comes and pushes in front of you in that queue. Never mind the fact that you've been there since 7 a.m. in the morning. What happens to you? Like, your mind starts to boil. You can feel that feeling in your stomach. It wants to come out. You just want to. We say, stop right there and listen to our guest, Daniel Rabinovitz, who is a clinical psychologist and here to help us understand and manage that sensation or feeling of anger. Daniel, thank you very much for being here this morning. And when we talk about anger, it's something that we all feel. Or do we? Because I wonder sometimes whether we truly understand what anger is. So from a clinical psychology point of view, how is anger defined?
Okay, so let's define anger as, let's start here. Okay, anger is an emotion.
Okay.
So an emotion is something that you feel in your body, and it happens. It just happens. And you're getting to that state where you feel like your heart is racing and you feel like your muscles are tensing and you feel like your mouth is dry, just like the situation that you described.
I get this warmth in my stomach.
Okay.
It's just warm. Yeah.
And it can happen anywhere. It can happen in your shoulders or it can happen in your feet. So, moving on from what an emotion is, anger is that sense of unfairness, that sense of it's a displeasurable feeling. And you get this feeling when you sense that you've been wronged in some way, just like that person who cut in front of you in the line.
Yeah.
So now you get the sense that you've been wronged, and something comes up in you. Now you label it as a feeling, and the feeling is anger.
What's happening in your brain from a synapses point of view? What's
lots.
firing off? Is it here? Is it there? Is it glowing red? You know how they like to make it look like it glows red?
And it does. It does. In
does
lots
it?
of the scans, that's how you see it. That's how the scientists are able to determine which areas of the brain light up. And so from those scans, we're able to determine. Now you've measured a whole lot of people who've had scans in the machine, and they've made them angry in the machine. And they can see that there's a surge of glucose in certain areas, and specifically it hits the amygdala. The amygdala is kind of the part of the primitive brain where all our emotions sit.
Where is that?
It's kind of like halfway down.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So and actually, if you think about it, here's like the hind part of the brain, the middle brain.
Yes.
And most mammals have this part, and then over this part develops kind of the thinking part of the brain.
Yes.
The frontal cortex, and so this primitive part of the brain is activated in moments to protect yourself and in moments that are difficult to cope with. So when you feel like you've been wronged, this part is activated. And then it sends messages to other parts of your body.
And then maybe that's where the difference then between anger and rage comes in. So what's rage then?
Okay, so I've spoken earlier about what emotions are, that emotions are kind of all these different feelings in the body, and you have a spectrum of feelings. So you can go from, on the one side, you can go from maybe just mild annoyance, all the way to rage.
Yes.
So that mild annoyance all the way to rage is a spectrum of feelings. So we differentiate those feelings in terms of how you feel them, and what we say is that the difference between rage and anger is if you can control it or if you can't control it.
Now, I think this might anger you, but I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for a second, and we're going to quickly come back with Daniel a bit later on. And I want to understand, maybe, is anger always a bad thing? Ponder that while we go over to the kitchen quickly.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
A great treat to start off your Tuesday morning. We're still here with clinical psychologist Daniel Rabinovitz. We're talking about anger, and we're trying to understand this emotion that many of us feel on a daily basis. And earlier on, we tried to define and understand what it is. And right now, we want to find out where it all comes from, the root of anger. So I guess a lot of people would think that anger is always caused by external forces. So something happens to you from outside, and then anger comes. Is that the truth?
It can. It can equally happen from inside. So you could just be... In fact, we talk about anger as a secondary emotion. So what do we mean by a secondary emotion? That means that there's always something that makes us feel vulnerable first. So to give you an example, maybe you're standing in that line and you've had a fight with your girlfriend the night before. And while you're standing in that line, you're thinking about that and you feel the hurt and you feel the rejection. And then somebody cuts in front of you. Now, you're not acting immediately off that person who cuts in front of you. You're acting off that feeling of vulnerability first. And that's why we call anger a secondary emotion. So if you think of it as an iceberg, the top of the iceberg is like the anger, and then underlying the ocean is all the different feelings that bubble underneath the surface, etc.
Yeah. So tell me about the processes that happen in your body, and perhaps those things that you can identify to know that, okay, I'm going to this stage of anger, and maybe can be an indication for you to try some kind of mechanisms of trying to quell it.
Yeah. So if you think about anger as, like I've already explained, as being in the body, then you have to understand it as a brain and body reaction. It can happen here and it can happen here. So what happens is something happens either from the outside or internally. Oh, I had a fight with my girlfriend the night before, and then a chain of reactions starts happening. The amygdala, which I spoke about earlier, sends through neurotransmitter chemicals like catecholamine, and this sparks off a whole of hormones and neurotransmitters to the rest of the body, and they start affecting things like the adrenal gland, and it then sends out messages. Now it's going to make my muscles stiff, ready for a fight. Now it's going to make it's going to take it's going to cut off my digestive system so that I don't concentrate on digesting food. It's going to prepare me for maybe fighting, or it's going to prepare me for that flight mode, or it's going to make me freeze. It's going to do something to me. So those hormones and those neurotransmitters transmit messages to our body to help our body to prepare for action.
Yeah. For some people, it might be kind of a self-explanatory question, but do some people feel anger stronger as an emotion than other people?
For sure.
Yeah.
Lots of people. And look, I mean, we're 7 billion people on the planet, so we're all going to feel things differently. I think the key message that I'd like to give you is that we all feel emotions. Some people feel emotions stronger than others, and it's how we deal with the emotion that counts. Anger is only a bad thing if it's destructive. So anger is a good thing if it can be channeled in a constructive way. Yes, people do experience emotions very differently. You know, it all depends on your socio-cultural background, and it depends on your family. It depends on your genes. It depends on you know, kind of how your framework of how you view life.
Yeah.
And some people even feel entitled. I'm entitled to something, and then they don't get it, but you're actually not entitled to it.
Okay. All right. Hold on to that thought a little bit, Daniel. We're going to be back with you, keep you on the hot seat as we inquire more about anger, especially the question that I want to ask Daniel afterwards, that can anger actually, or chronic anger be considered to be a mental condition similar to something like depression? We'll be back with him after the break.
Oh, you can make my day. It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It's a Tuesday morning, and I hope it's been a pleasant one, as right now we delve right back into our medical discussion as we do on Tuesdays. We're talking about anger, those emotions we all experience sometime from day to day. In fact, we've got a caller on the line. Craig is on the line. Good morning, Craig. Very, very well. Thanks for your call, Craig. What's your question to Daniel?
Okay, I've had brain surgery to the right frontal lobe of my brain, and that was 27 years ago, and yesterday I discovered that the right frontal lobe of my brain is actually non-existent. And for the last 27 years, I have been struggling extremely badly with anger. And I'd just like to know if there's anything I can do to try and curb the anger. As you were saying, headaches, stomach aches, my whole body aches, especially my muscles.
All right, so Craig is asking if there's any advice you can give to him about how he can try to control that anger.
Yeah, Craig, I empathise with you. I think it's very difficult. You know that in the 1800s there was a guy named Phineas Gage, and he was working on the railway line. I mean, this is a famous psychology story. And as he was working on the railway line, a railway piece of the shaft struck him through the eye, and it protruded right out of his head. So it totally destroyed the frontal lobes of his brain. And before this event happened, Phineas was said he was said to be kind of a very nice guy, a very calm, tranquil, pleasant type of person. And as soon as this type of thing happened, it destroyed that part of the brain which controls that underlying bit. So how I like to describe this is that once that part is gone, then it becomes very difficult to control it. It's like trying to ride a wild horse without having a saddle, without having reins, and you're kind of clinging on to this wild animal underneath you. So I think the best advice that I could give Craig is to persist every day with certain methods that you can get from a professional who can help you to identify certain triggers immediately. As soon as you can identify those triggers, then you can start putting into process. Let's just say a program that will prevent you from getting angry. Right. Life isn't just about random events that happen. Especially for Craig, he needs to organize himself around a program in which he can recognize his anger and then act on the solutions.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the call, Craig, and thanks for sharing with us. And when we come back, I want to ask maybe about methods like meditation and doing something like yoga, including medicine, just as a supplementary way of trying to kind of, build a lifestyle around managing anger. We'll come back with Daniel Rabinovitz, our clinical psychologist, shortly.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Thanks, gents. Sounds like you're having a lot of fun there playing that game. Thanks to Gareth and to Graham. We're back again with Daniel Rabinovitz, who's our clinical psychologist, and we're talking about managing anger, understanding it. Earlier on, I was asking Daniel about whether anger can be classified as a mental condition in the same way that depression is classified, and if so, if there's any kind of medication that can help with that.
Right, so we have a big book of mental disorders, the psychologists and the psychiatrists, and inside that book there are various classifications, various categories. So anger as a word is not really classified in this book. But what is classified are other similar kinds of conditions. One is oppositional defiant disorder, which is mainly for kids who kind of fight against their parents. They don't want to do things that their folks ask, or their teachers. And then we have conduct disorder, which is when you're kind of quite brutal to the world and you show no remorse for what happens. That's also a kind of demonstration of anger. And the last one I think is the most important. This one is intermittent explosive disorder. So what that means is that you'll go for a period of, say, a few months, and during those months there'll be times when you just burst out in anger, or as we spoke about earlier, you burst out in rage. So you can be diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder. Otherwise, you need to just manage anger as a normal emotion. And like any other emotion, which we all have the whole range, you need to manage it appropriately. So even something like happiness can be a bad thing if it's not managed correctly. And we see that in things like bipolar disorder, where a lot of happiness leads you on that very high manic level, and that high manic level can be bad for you. So anger can be both good and it can be bad.
Wow, extraordinary stuff. And let's quickly, as we wrap up the conversation, talk about prevention, how we can go about preventing it, and also talk to me about what parents can do in making sure that the environment that they raise their children in is conducive to leading them in those healthy ways of managing, preventing anger.
All right, so I want to tie this into how to manage anger generally. You have to stop because that system is activated. So the kids that have learned this have grown up in an environment that is they've grown up in an environment that's kind of held them, and they don't have to resort to things like drugs or alcohol to cope. So you can manage your lifestyle through what you eat, through relaxation techniques, through calming down. The myth of anger is that you're supposed to let it out and thrash a pillow and get angry somewhere else. Don't do that, because the more anger you show, the more anger you feel. So rather just stop, think, take a breath, observe,
Yeah.
get perspective, and then proceed.
All right. I tell you what, Daniel, it's been most fascinating. We certainly have to get you back here to speak more on this topic and many others. Your insights are very much appreciated, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, hopefully that was insightful and enlightening to you. But of course, there's still lots more you can expect on your Feel Good Breakfast show.